Good morning, everyone. Please help me welcome Semehar Ghebrekidan. She is the Community Inclusion Liaison person for the City of Sioux City. And today she is going to talk with us about diversity, equity, and inclusion as it's relevant to returning citizens. So go ahead, Semehar. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me well? Just shake your heads or, yep. Thank you, guys. So thank you, Sarah and Cash, for linking me into here to you guys today. I'm really happy to be here and talk with you all. This is now the second time I'll be presenting in front of folks who focus on reentry. So I'm really excited to be here with you all. I'm currently in a production space at KWIT. So if it looks dark, my bad. But I'm the community inclusion liaison for the city of Sioux City. So really what my job is I'm in charge of the diversity, equity, and inclusion work for our municipality. So what that looks like for me, at least, is that I work with community members, I work with organizations, entities, nonprofit organizations, private businesses. I really work with everybody, right, for the betterment of our entire community. And so when I think about what does that look like, I think about who that all entails, because a lot of the times when we talk about services, we're talking about services that really are supposed to be for everybody, but not everybody is accessing them as best as they can. And we got to look at why. And so a lot of my job is figuring out the why. Why is it that why is it that we have blockades happening with our folks? Why is it that they're not accessing services? And also, are we doing something that's making it hard for them to access it, right? And so a lot of the times I try to talk about myself first to move on with the topic of diversity and inclusion, right? And I think in your realm, in your world is working with folks who, had criminal offenses of some sort. And really what your job is to support them in a sense so that they can make sustainable changes long term so that you don't ever have to see them again. Does that sound kind of like it? Shake your head if you think so, right? I see some shaking heads, so I'm very happy. And that's what I want too, right? I want better citizens at the end of the day as well. And if you make a mistake, right, I want you to be able to learn from it and be supported. And I think it's important to understand diversity, equity, and inclusion because a lot of the times it's talked about in sort of this dirty manner, right? Like, how many of you guys are nervous to talk about this today? And you can just shake your head generally, or, you're worried, some are shaking up and down, some are shaking no. Yeah, and I get it because there's a lot of false news about what this means and what this looks like and why it's important, I think a lot of us, when we talk about diversity, the first thing we come into mind of diversity is race, right? And to me, the definition I use when I talk about diversity is the interrelated dimensions of human identities, such as race, ethnicity, class, gender, sexual orientation, sovereign tribal nations, country of origin, citizenship, language, ability status, religion, political involvement, veteran status, heritage, genetic information, and others. So I say this because I think a lot of the times when we hear these words, diversity, it sounds like we don't want white people here, is what it really comes down to. And sometimes that's like, unfortunately, how people try to phrase it. And that's not my case of how I think of it. To me, in a group of 20 white people, there's diversity among that group, right? Because to say that every white person across the board is the same would be like saying every Ethiopian you meet is the same, right? Or every Black person you meet is the same. And I'm not like my mom. I may be a foot taller than her and look exactly like her, but we're not the same people. And so for myself, I think that's why it's so important to understand diversity is that it's not just one thing, it's the many things. It's all of these things that come together is diversity to me. And there's things that are invisible and visible diversity, right? Racial, typically you can tell if someone's not, right, what you look like, right? You can tell skin color if they're different, right? Just like you could tell if someone's taller than you or shorter than you, right? But there's things like invisible diversity. Like a lot of the times some people don't actively show up their religion, right? There are some people who are Muslim who wear hijabs, and some people who are Muslims who wear tube tops, right? So it's the same thing. It's the invisible diversity is really important to think about too, because a lot of the times I know your guys' paperwork because unfortunately for me, I've had to work with folks who work with y'all. And I mean it in the most, and I don't mean it in like a rude sense, but like we've seen each other before, some of us, right? Because I have patients before who um, did naughty things that they ended up having to talk to y'all. And you guys get a lot of information about these people. You know, you get a lot of demographic information, where they're from, what their background is, maybe this, maybe that, but you're not getting all of that invisible things, right? What's their personality like, right? You're not going to know for sure. You're not going to know if they're introverts or extroverts, right? And you got to know those things because sometimes you come off strong, right? Like when I was an HIV case manager, for example, I like grew up in a very sex negative talking home. So when I brought up sex to patients who are Ethiopian, they would yell at me and be like, why do you want to know my business? But really, I'm working in the realm of HIV. So I got to understand that this is a touchy subject for this group of folk. And so I got to come on it and come to it in a way that makes sense for them. And so I can't be just ignoring, oh, well, it's just this, and ignoring all these other things that may have a negative interaction with that. It's almost like when you're working with folks who were victims of sexual violence, right? Some people are going to be comfortable talking about it. Some people aren't, based on their lens or the diversity of their person, right? And so we got to think about all of those things when we talk to each other. And really, when we think about it, like when you look at me, you won't know right away that I have a master's degree, right? Because it's not labeled here. I don't have a tattoo that says master's diploma, something like that. All you see is what I look like. That's all you'll ever see of me. And so I think we have to also understand too, aside from that, we're all very different, is that there's layers to us, right? Sort of like an onion, right? So there's your most important thing. Like for me, my most important thing I think about is my cultural identity, being an Ethiopian immigrant background. So that's layer one. And then I'm also Black, so that's layer two. But then I'm also a woman, that's layer three. And so I have all these layers. And I think your job was sort of like my job, was unpeeling the layers of these folks that you're working with so you don't got to see them again, right? So that they're successful when they reorientate back into society, so that they don't come back and reoffend. You got to figure out all those layers. And that's why diversity is so important, because all of those layers are a part of diversity. The second term that I want to define for you all today is inclusion. And I think it's talked about in so many different ways, but to me, inclusion is the active, intentional, and ongoing engagement with diversity in people, curricular and co-curricular practices, and communities. So this is a process of proactively ensuring all people are acknowledged, validated, and involved in planning procedures, policies, programs, and activities. So I think of it with you all that you make plans with your folks, just like I did with case management, right? Is that you make plans with your folks to say, all right, so what is it that we're going to be working on? What are goals that we're setting, right? And it's important to think about that, because when you plan with folks, there's different things that come up, right? And if someone has had an aversion to men because they were trafficked by men, and now you're their caseworker and you're a man, it might be hard to plan, right, with that person, because they might not trust you, right? And so it's actively getting them to get to a place where, one, you've laid down a safe boundary and foundation with them that says, hey, I'm here as your support. I'm not here for anything other than for your benefit, you know? That's the whole point, is making it safe, because then you get to learn those little layers of that onion of a person and figuring out, okay, so what is it that's hurting them from making progress forward? What is it that's doing that? I want to help you do that. So by actively participating with them in a process like that, that's a helpful way. And that's just an easy example with the work you guys do. Um, it also aims to increase one's knowledge, consciousness, empathy, and critical thinking of the ways identities intersect and interact within and across networks and institutions, and targets way to improve equity. So how I think of it is like this. Do you remember when you had parents? I don't know if you have Ethiopian parents like me, most don't. But when you had parents and you'd be like, Mom, I want to sleep over at Ashley's house. And your mom would be like, no. And then you'd be like, well, why not? And she'd say, it's my house rules. That's my house rules. I don't care. It's my house rules. But you'd be like, Mom, why? Mom, why? And she would just keep pressing, it's your house rules, right? But there was no negotiation. There was no advocate for you, right? Who was really working with you to make sure that you were being heard, because they're your parents, right? So, like, if you lived in my house, it was a tyranny based house, right? So, my mom was queen and king, and we were the peasants there, right? And so, for us, like, we just listened. But really, when you think about it, it's about understanding that people will have questions and their different identities will come into play with those questions. Like a simple example of something that happened was, with me, my boss, I park downtown and I was getting nervous because I was parking in a parking garage and he was saying, you keep getting these tickets, Ghebrekidan, what's going on? Why do you keep getting parking tickets? I keep seeing you on the parking list. I'm like, well, Bob, you're not understanding this part of my identity. Like, yeah, I'm this big black lady. If you see me in real life, I'm like almost 6 foot, right? But at the same time, I'm still a woman walking around here in the middle of the night, potentially with a bunch of stuff in my hand in a parking garage. And you know what? At the end of the day, the other part of my identity is that I'm a caregiver, right? I provide financial assistance to my family. So to me, it's like, if someone hurts me or does something to me, I'm risking much more than just like, my car being stolen from me. I'm potentially missing the point of taking care of my family long term. And so you have to think of that. And if my boss would have thought of it that way, he wouldn't have even come to me with that conclusion. He would have said, how can we talk more about how to make you feel safe at work? Right? How can we make it so that you don't feel like you have to go into this parking lot at night and then risk getting $12 tickets every day? Right? So there's a really good quote that I use when I talk about inclusion. And it's diversity is going to a party, inclusion is being part of the party planning committee. Why I say this is because I know you all work with people throughout your areas, right? Like Sarah and Cash, for example, are great. They come to all the events that are DEI led. They're all out in the community, all of that good stuff. Um, why I say this is because, you will invite people who you think will be really beneficial into your spaces for help, because that's what people need. They need help because these kind of things are hard to understand if they're not on the forefront of your mind, right? Like I never worry about walking into a place and not accessing it because I walk. I don't have a wheelchair. I don't have crutches. I don't have a hard walking problem or anything. So for me, I never worry about ability because that's just not my issue. But it's really think about going outside of yourself, and thinking outside of your own problems. And so when I think of this, you guys will be using folks in your community, whether it's nonprofit organizations, whether it's, domestic violence shelters, things like that. And when you're talking about policy improvement, processes, how to better connect with folks, when you invite these people in, remember to take their feedback as experts because you invited them in as experts, right? And so when you come in and have them come in as experts, but then you disregard everything they say, you might have lost that connection because you were too busy advocating for what you wanted instead of hearing the thoughts around you and being inclusive. And so I think it's so fundamentally important to be inclusive more than to be diverse, more than to be equitable, because at the end of the day, if you have inclusion, you'll have diversity and you'll have equity. And so for me, the next definition I want to cover is equity. Equity is the concept of treating everyone fairly by acknowledging everyone's unique situation and addressing systemic barriers. The aim of equity is to ensure that everyone has access to equal results and benefits. And I think if you guys Google equity, like a picture of equity, you'll see equity typically is that fence line photo, right? There's someone who's tall, someone who's middle height, someone who's short. And then, they say equality versus equity. Equality is if we each gave one person a box, but equity is the tall guy doesn't get a box because he's tall, and the middle person gets one, but the shorter person gets two. That's equity, right? It's understanding that um, people have different needs and they have to be on a people by people basis, right? Like I talk about myself a lot because it's the best way for me to tell you because it's my lived experience, right? For myself, as a immigrant background person, I never need an interpreter, right? Because I speak English well. And I never need someone to help me read paperwork or fill out forms or anything like that because I'm able to do that. Whereas my mom and dad needed help like that growing up. And they still do to this day where they ask me to read forms. And so how cool would it have been if the things like equity were talked about back then and the problems that some of us have nowadays were subsidized back then, so now they're not problems of the future, right? And so I think of it for you guys is that really you guys are like your equity people. You guys do equity work with helping these folks who came in and they have felonies and they have records now and they're trying to reestablish themselves into society and they don't know how to. You are their equity person. That's really what your job is. You're helping them find resources, you're helping them get reacclimated in the community. And we all know, just like me, as a case manager, there were some patients who are HIV positive who, oh my God, I would talk to them every single damn day. And they didn't hear me. They wouldn't hear me. I would give them everything aside from their signature, and they wouldn't do it. But there are some who only need you to say it once and they follow instructions. That's equity, is understanding that you're going to get the ones who talk that you only got to talk to once, but you're going to get the ones that you got to talk to every single day and you never give up. That's equity to me. And so I wanted just to go over those definitions because I think it's so important because there's just so many different versions of these definitions. And these are the ones I use with my city. And I just think they're so important because when we connect with people, we have to know about them. Like we have to know them as an individual, not as a group, not as a marker, not as an applicant, not as a probation person or something of that sort, you know? And so how do we do that exactly? You know, I say to you all, and I ask you, and I'm striving to ask you or challenging you to think about it like this. If there's something important in your life, right? Pretend it's you have a peanut allergy, right? And that's really important because if you eat peanuts, you'll die. And someone ignored that about you. And someone constantly ignored it and kept putting you into this space where, God, you're gonna be around peanuts all day. How would it make you feel? You know, think about that for a moment. How would it make you feel that I've told you multiple times that I'm allergic to peanuts and I keep putting you into these environments where there's going to be peanuts where I could die at any second? That's an extreme example, right? But it's the same thing of you not caring about the things that matter to me, right? If I'm telling you it's really important for you to acknowledge my African descent and you tell me it doesn't matter, we're never going to get to a page where I trust you, where I connect with you well, where I'm telling you the truth as well. Because at the end of the day, the whole point of your job is you're trying to truth seek as well. You're trying to truth seek so that you know, okay, this is going to be an upcoming problem for Marshall, and we got to talk with Marshall about this because it's about to come up. And before it comes up, let's try to divert this and let's try to fix it, you know. And you've got to have trust, right? And that comes with really checking your biases, right? Your judgments of people, really nipping those in the butt as soon as you see them, really doing some internal work. I think looking at yourself first is important because I think RuPaul says it best, but you know, if you don't know yourself, how the hell can you know anybody else? Because I think it's the biggest thing, because even as a HIV case manager, I was challenged a lot because I did not work in an area before this. I was in education where I was working with people who use drugs constantly, right? I was working with people who were actively on meth, actively using. And finally, someone in my office was brave enough to sit there and say, Sam, your bias is showing every time you talk to patients. who use drugs. And I said, no, it's not. I'm a diversity inclusion person. It would never show. Like, I'm thinking I'm perfect. And, this guy sat there and said, no, when patients who are on drugs, who say that they're on drugs to you, you shut down because you're uncomfortable. You tell them that there's these extra stipulations on things that there's not extra stipulations on other people. And you judge them. Your tone becomes negative, all of that. And you can't do that because they're calling you and trusting you to tell you this information. And so what's the point of you judging them when you're their caseworker? They're supposed to call you and tell you, hey, I slipped and I messed up and I need help. They're supposed to call you. That's your role. And if you can't do that, you can't do this work. And it really was a reality check, and it was a shocking reality check because, I think of myself as this very inclusive person. But because he was strong enough to tell me that, I really sat down and I did like some self thinking. All right, what's making me nervous? It's because I don't know anything about meth. I don't know what it is really. I don't know how people inject it. I don't know what happens to them. I don't know how you use it, nothing. So I had to deep dive and do that. And so that started only because someone checked me and asked me and said, hey, I'm seeing something. So when you see someone do something in your job as well, I encourage you, if not, I command you to step up to the plate and say, hey, this is a problem. And I'm looking at this and I'm seeing something that's not okay, that you're doing with this group, but not this group and not this group. I think that's really important to think about. And I want to be able to open this up for questions. If you want to be able to talk your questions, I would love that. You don't have to chat. It's also nice to put a face to the question. Um, yeah, I just want to be able to do that for you all because I could lecture all day, but I don't want to do that to y'all. I don't know. I think Shelly was her name who's put it up. Can you unmute, not mute everybody, and then people can ask questions, please and thank you.
I don't know. I think Luke, do you know how to do that?
I-
Unmute everyone?
I don't think we can unmute everyone, but folks can unmute themselves.
Oh, okay. That sounds good.
Yeah. So if you want to unmute and ask the question or put it in the chat, we have someone watching the chat. There's no questions in there as of now.
Everybody's probably sitting here waiting like, am I going to be first? Am I going to be first? Maybe a hand raise would be helpful. But one thing I wanted to say is obviously we've had a long connection and been able to like work through a lot of things. And one thing that I go back to, and I thought maybe you could elaborate a little bit on, is these DEI factors have played a part in some of the traumas that our clients have endured, right? And that has at times in my career made an impact on how I'm going to respond to this individual, obviously through a trauma-informed response, but also being able to like try to put that lens on and try to have some kind of idea of what maybe they're facing in this moment. Could you elaborate a little bit on how, on any parts of that I just said, on how we can do that with a person in our office? Maybe say, we're talking about sex. I had a person who we suspected human trafficking, and I needed to have a conversation with her to dig a little deeper and see if there's some more troubleshooting we needed to do or connect her with the right people. And when I asked her questions, she thought I was calling her a prostitute because of her African descent and the way that she was raised. Could you elaborate on that stuff for us?
Yeah. So I have a good example of this. When I was an HIV case manager, a lot of my clients were typically from my community, Ethiopian, Eritrean, refugee folk, right? And most of the time, Ethiopian and Eritrean patients were so nice and happy to see me because they were like, oh my God, this Ethiopian Eritrean lady, she knows what I eat. She knows my language. I can talk with her. I don't need an interpreter. Yes, like queen was like how they kind of treated me. And I got one guy, and every time he would see me, he would snap at me, called me all kinds of B words, C words, things like that. And I was like, Jesus, what is going on with this guy? Because I was telling him, oh my gosh, hey, I am here to help you. Oh, you don't need to call me that. And I just kept saying, what am I doing? Am I offending him? Like, I had multiple staff coming in with meetings with me to see, like, am I doing something that I'm not thinking about? And I finally got his casework, like information from his previous person. He was trafficked for 30 years of his 36-year life by his aunt, right? So when you think about it, who does his aunt look like of all the people who I work with? Me. I probably look like his aunt. I'm much taller probably, but I look like his aunt. And so I am triggering this response from him immediately as soon as he sees me. Because at the end of the day, someone from his own family, from his own community did that to him. So who am I to help him? How can he trust me? He doesn't know me. And so I had to make the decision that day. Do I sit and continue struggling with this man who I'm triggering the heck out of every single day? Or, do I switch patients with a different caseworker and say, hey, I am not getting through with him. He is not comfortable with me. Based on his records that I just received, I see that he has a problem with something that happened before I met him. So I know it's not because of me, but he has trauma that has not been addressed. And we had to switch, and instantly he was better for it. Instantly, he had a better connection with his providers. He had better connection with the new caseworker. And so sometimes we think of diversity as this thing too of, oh yeah, if you're Latinx, I can give you a Latinx person and you'll do well. And it's like, no, you got to check all of those markers. And so Sarah's example of, you're approaching a topic that's sort of taboo, like sex. Like when I had to do it, right? I know that most people don't like talking about it, right? Not people are like, yeah, this is what I do, that's not how they are. So what I always started when those conversations came, because you have to do intakes just like I did, is I'd say, hey, Ashley, I just wanted to let you know that this next part of this intake is going to be concerning sex and sexual activity. I just want to let you know that personally speaking, I don't care what you do or don't do, right? But this is for your paperwork. And I got to make sure that you're safe and that you're doing okay. And that if you need services of some sort, that I refer you to the right people. So I just need to make sure to talk to you about this and ask you about this, okay? Because I got to do it for your paperwork. Are you okay with moving forward? And a lot of the times, at least 90% of the times, once I started asking that before I went into it, people were honest. People were less guarded when talking about it because they knew I'm not just talking about it because I want to know what you're doing. They knew that I was talking about it because at the end of the day, I'm doing paperwork that I have to do in order to help you. So I think thinking about it like this, you get files after files of people, right, that you're talking with, and you know what their offenses are and things like that. But I think there are some things that you'll see that are obvious, right? If they are sex trafficking victims, right, going into that and saying, okay, I need to go into this with care, with thoughts, with, really being observant and saying, okay, well, if, their boyfriend was trafficking them and you're a male officer, maybe they're not going to feel safe talking with you. So maybe that's something that you hand off to a female coworker that at least it can get done, just that portion, right? That they feel safe maybe with that person. Or maybe it's a complete switch. It really just depends on that. And you got to be communicative, right? And ask them, hey, is there a disconnect or have I offended you? Am I causing it so that you can't be open with me? Because I need you to be open for this to work. I need you to be open with me. And so I think having those and asking those conversations are really, really important. Other questions? I think there's something in the chat, sorry. It says, do you have experience with sex offenders and sex offenders that fail to register? Just curious what your approach is with this population. So I've had patients who are in that category as well. I think, right, you all know your internal processes better than me. I do think it's important to break it down for some people. The reason is we all assume that people know English well. We all assume that people are literate. We all assume people are tech savvy or know the processes. To assume that everybody is doing it because they're evading isn't correct, or not trying to sign up or register isn't correct. Some people really don't know. So I think if you see something like that, I think it's important just to be honest and say, hey, this hasn't been done. Can we do it together? And creating that, all right, we're going to do an action right now, and doing that. And obviously, if they're still refusing, writing that up and documenting that you've had these conversations this many times and you understand and see that they're not about to listen to what you're saying. That's the important piece to that as well. I always think it's important to make sure that people have comprehension of what you just said. So at the end of all my appointments, I always did comprehension checks of what we did. So what did we talk about? What are the things you must do? Do you understand everything we talked about today? Do you need me to go over it again? Just because, again, you're assuming people speak English, you're assuming people are literate, you're assuming people also have a high level of education, at least high school. Not everyone does. I had a patient who was 76 years old and stopped going to school after the 4th grade. And so you're talking to this person about why it's important to take medication for your viral load at a 4th grade level, but they're 76. And so I think you got to have different approaches and figure out what approach makes sense for a person, right? All about individualized approaches.
Sam, I kind of have a follow-up question to that and to the previous question that I had asked. And I think it's that especially as a white female, having somebody walk into my office, I am very passionate about DEI, and I want to be able to, figure out what approach I need to take to best suit a person. But sometimes I think that people here could benefit from hearing that, how you approach that. If you were to sit in my office and immediately I started talking about your diversity factors and asking about like doing diversity mapping of some sort, could it be seen? And I think the fear is that it would be seen as me making issues where there's not issues. If I'm going to talk about your race, or I'm going to ask about your sexuality, or any of those kinds of things. And I think it makes people scared to even touch on the topics.
No, 100%. I get that because, it's sort of like the thought of, I identify as heterosexual, right? And so for me, a lot of times I get nervous in queer spaces, not because of the fact that I am nervous around folks who are in the LGBT community. It's because I don't want to offend anybody. I don't want to take up space. I don't want to do something wrong. That's all it is. Because I understand all of us don't walk around and be like, today I'm going to be offensive. Like, that's not how we walk around, right? And try to occupy space. But I do think there are things that come up, right? When you're talking with people, like, hey, how are you doing? All right, we're going to do an intake. And so here are the things we're going to go over, and giving them an overview of what happens. And then, giving little comments and seeing what they say. Like, I would always be like, my patients would come up to me and they'd be like, okay, so where are you from? And they're like, I'm from Mauritius. I'm like, oh, where's Mauritius? And then depending what they're saying, I'm getting more information about, do they like this topic? Do they not? It's like being friends with people. But I also understand you have to have some sort of boundaries, right? Just like me, I had to have boundaries with my folks. But it's really like picking up the hints of what they're dropping. It's like, oh, so where's Mauritius? And they're like, oh my God, I miss my home country. I love Mauritius. It's da, da, da. So now you know that this is something that you can bring up the next time you talk about it. And maybe that's something you just Googled and you saw on the news, Mauritius had this thing happen. And they're like, oh, did you hear about this back home? And they're like, yeah, this happened. And now you've just figured out that this is a stressor for them as well. It's not always about being like, oh, period, you're a Black Ethiopian, straight, this queen. Yeah, like that's not what no one's expecting from you, right? It's really just give and take. It's about giving them a little bit of your individual as well. Because at the end of the day, who likes talking to a doctor who's like, hey, what do you need? This. Oh, this is wrong with you? Oh, your stomach hurts? Oh, this. And then they walk out and they come in and it's just very transactional. No one likes transactional relationships. You got to give them a little bit. I'm not telling you to give them your address or your cell phone number. I'm telling you like, oh yeah, that's funny. Like I studied abroad in Mauritius at one point, Oh, really? You did? Where did you go? Giving them that little thing that indicates that you understand that. I also think it's important to kind of look up, if you have a caseload of folks, like for me, for example, half of my folks were Ethiopian Eritrean. I already know what that is. So I had that advantage at my fingertips, but not everybody does. So like in my job, I used to do home visits. So at home visits, it's offensive for my community to not accept food that is given to you, right? And so I would do a little taste and be done as my little piece, right? But that was something that wasn't done before in my office. And patients were like, my caseworker doesn't like me. And it's like, that's that little piece. And so that's how I think of that. Also for you guys, I know they come to your office. You're not always doing home visits per se. And so think about what's in your office, right? As in decor, right? Think about, does cotton in your office, is it going to spring something in somebody's mind that makes them feel weird? Is a political message going to spring someone's mind that's going to feel weird? Whether it's, I love Trump, I love Biden, I love Obama, is that going to give somebody some indication of what they're going to think about you and how they're going to interact with you, right? I think thinking about those little subliminal things is really, really important, because at the end of the day, regardless of who you like politically, what kind of decoration you like, all of those things can trigger a good or positive experience for that person. And then if they have a positive experience, they'll more likely come back to you. They'll more likely talk to you and be open with you when problems come up, instead of hiding and evading you, right? So it's these little things we got to think about, right? I mean, even in City Hall, we're having discussions of this, of, we have all this historical artwork, but there's nothing about our Indigenous community, and they're the original community here. So where are they on this? We got to think about, how does that feel to be like, Sioux City's history started in 1892, and it's like, well, there were people here before 1892. We can't just like pretend nothing else was there, and that, oh my God, Sioux City was here and there was buildings, and oh, like, wow. So I just think of, it's really just being really intentional with your thinking, and going, would this offend somebody, and thinking about it, Googling it, and seeing if it does, those kind of things. It's like, like words even that you use, like, when they say, oh, I got gypped, like, that's not a good word, right? For certain communities. And you might be running into somebody who's part of that community, right? And so I think words are important, decor is important, right? Understanding that body language is different. Like if you meet my mom, she's one of like this kind of lady. She just looks at you like this at all times. And some people are like, whoa, Rosa. And some people aren't giving you any kind of eye contact at all. And so understanding too, that's culturally different, right? There's going to be a time at one point potentially where, if you're a woman in this role, you might work with somebody who culturally does not respect women. How do you talk about this? It's important to think about it, because we did it here. We have a bunch of Afghani immigrants who just came in, and we had to talk about it at the police force of, how does that work? And I said, you know what? You give them one warning. You give them one pass. And they were like, a pass? You give them a pass to be disrespectful to our women officers? And I said, that's not what I'm telling you. What I'm telling you to do is, if this is their culture that they've had for the last 50, 60 years, that this person has grown up in, because it's not often the younger guys who are stuck in that way, it's the older folks who are a little bit stuck in that way. And so if that's the case, you say, okay, you want a male officer? Sure. That's when that male officer's job is to come in and say, I'm just letting you know, after this interaction, if a woman police officer pulls you over, you must comply with whatever she says, because at the end of the day, culturally here, we are all equal. Culturally here, you have to respect her authority, because her badge is the same as my badge. And if you get pulled over and if you do not respect the things that she's asking of you, you may have a heightened interaction, which may lead you to being arrested or whatever that is. And so I'm giving you this warning now. Can you repeat this back to me? Can you tell me that you understand? I'm asking this because I'm going to put this on your ticket. I'm going to document that I've had this conversation with you, so that when you say, oh my God, I've never had this happen to me. I never got warned. Well, it's documented that this has been warned. It's the same thing with folks that you'll work with, potentially in-house, where they say, I don't want to talk to Katrina, because why would I want to talk with Katrina? She's a woman. Well, that's when Dan has to step in and say, hey, we don't do that with Katrina. And if this is going to be a continued issue, maybe I'll have to take you over. Or maybe you're going to have to be suspended from our program. Obviously, it's a lot different for you. Caseworker was at will things. So like we could be like, nope, we're going to bounce you off the program if you're going to be disrespectful. But for you, it's not as simple. And so those are the kind of conversations I want to empower you all to have. Other questions? You can ask anything and everything. I'm a pretty open book.
Good morning, this is Katrina, and I
Hi.
work for the Department of Corrections. And I just wondered if you were happy in your position and if you would like to be stolen from your position. I have so many questions that I will most likely be giving you a call, but I would like to thank you very much. You are so... The message is just sent so beautifully. I have not heard a DEI discussion such as this in the many that I have attended, and I thank you very much. I just see like people coming forward and wanting to talk when maybe they're in the past have been hesitant. So I thank you very much, and I look forward to talking with you.
No, thank you. I really appreciate that. Like I said, my whole job for me is at the end of the day, like I'm not here to hammer down my beliefs on you or to hammer down my feelings upon you. What I want you to understand, and everybody to understand as I work through this job, is that, you know, at the end of the day, just like y'all, I work with people who are suffering. And some of it's suffering based on, you know, mom and dad screwed them over from a young age, and they are, you know, unfortunately, they're almost like, it's like they're fucked from the beginning. And it stinks because it's hard to unscrew up somebody who's been screwed up since age 0, right? But, you know, we do the hopeful work that if we work and we try our best and we guide them as best as we can, that at the end of the day, we'll make a difference in their life. They'll take your words and they'll integrate it into their daily practice. That's the whole point. And so I really think it's so important to understand the individual in every part of that individual's lens or how they look out into the world, because just like you guys care about different things, so do other people. Like I think about my life every day, and I wake up and I think about my parents, I think about my siblings, I think about my husband, I think about my dog, right? Just like y'all think about your people that you're around, that you wake up with, you know, you think about that. But also there are things that you think about that you not everyone's thinking about, you know. Sarah quoted the mapping diversity activity, which if you guys Google mapping diversity Semehar, you'll be able to find it right away, and you can do it on your own. But I did that with every department head coming into the city, because right away when I came in, the rhetoric was Sem's going to defund the police. Sem is going to get rid of the fire department, and Sem is going to put all the money towards minority people, which I was like, whoa, so many assumptions about Sem coming into this role. And something that I learned while doing that mapping diversity activity is that, oh, excuse me, guys, sorry, a call came up for some reason, is that when I was doing that activity, I did it with the chief of police, because I knew that he was the most hesitant meeting me at first, because again, it was just popularized. Like, I'm going to come in there and no one's going to work for the police department. And we sat down, and the more I sat and talked with him about this diversity activity, the more I figured out that Rex and I are more the same than we are different. Rex came from a low income background, just like I did. He cares about money in the sense of scarcity, about being afraid of not having money tomorrow, just like I do. We're not that different when we think about it. But the things that are the difference is that some of my differences I truly care about, whereas he doesn't care, right? He doesn't think about being white or his ethnic background daily, but I do think about being Ethiopian daily. And so I think why I do these activities and why I think of it like this and starting from yourself is because although you look at the world like this, I'm looking at the world maybe like this. And if we're looking at it, the world's differently, we got to figure out how we're each looking at it. And that's why it's so important to do individualized approaches with your folks that you work with, including your coworkers. There's coworkers that I work with and I'm like, oh, Lord, you know? And when I think about it, I'm like, okay, so instead of being like negative mindset with this person, what is their approach? How do I get to talk to them? What language do I need to talk for them to get me? Right. And so it's the same thing, man. It's the same. It's like working with a coworker you don't like, right? How do you work with them and get your job done? You'll always work with clients that make you just want to rip your hair out of your head. And you'll work with clients that are just like, yes, you get it. And so just remember that the ones that are make you rip your head out of your hair out of your head are the ones that at the end of the day, when they win, you'll win right with them. I think there's Seth has a hand up.
Thank you.
Hi.
I wanted to touch on something that Katrina said that I really liked, which is that your DEI presentation was a lot different in a good way than like every other DEI presentation I've been to. And, you know, for the same reason. And what I mean is that it's very palatable and it's common sense and I understand it and it feels very doable. Like I feel like I have a lot of actionable steps. Like I feel like I have a whole bunch of more tools that I can use and apply in my work, which is fantastic. So I'm very thankful for that. So that's my comment. And then my question is like, and maybe you don't have the answer to this, but if you do, I'm all ears, which is like the tone of most or all of the other DEI presentations is kind of like almost like holier than thou, or condescending. They're like, well, you're biased, you're prejudiced, and you've been doing this wrong, and you're, you know, stuck in history. And I'm just like, oh gosh, you know, and like I want to be you know, inclusive and I want to be, you know, an effective person in my role, but like just being told like you're doing all these things wrong and you need to do all these things different. Like it's just, I guess I don't walk away from those presentations like feeling like it's particularly useful other than be told like you need to do X, Y, Z because you're doing it wrong. And so do you know why that particular style or tone just kind of like predominates the field of DEI presentations, or do you have any insight to that? I'm all ears.
Yeah. So Seth, I totally get what you're saying too, because I think a lot of people do the old school DEI, right? The old school DEI to me is the original rights. Like women need to vote. People who are in the LGBT community should be able to get married. Like Latinos should be able to do this. Like things like it was very basic. Like, and so I think a lot of the times, like I focus on nuances and I focus on, first off, like it needs to be palatable. If I sit there and I'm like, you're a racist, you're this, you're a homophobe, you're this, you're gonna be like, oh, Jesus, I don't want to ever talk to this lady again, right? And so I don't want you to feel like that's walking away from this. I want you to feel inspired or empowered to think about it. So that's like number one. The other piece is that some people who are DEI people are jaded, just like some people in the Department of Corrections probably are jaded, like, oh, these people will never be, you know. There are people like that in city government who are like, citizens, they don't care, they're not involved. We put it in the journal, that's enough. And it's like, well, we could also put it on Facebook, we could also put it on Instagram, we could, you know, like that's how I think of some stuff like that. And so I get it because I've had so much of that too. And I mean, I have people who are now, they're like, you're easy on people. And I was like, well, if I come out swinging with a mallet, I'm not going to have people left, right? You know, my philosophy is talk to you in private if you mess up. I don't talk to you in public if you mess up. because I think I'll talk to you in public once you've messed up 17 times and I've told you 17 times, you know, but in general, I think some of the old school people are like, call it out right this second, you know, berate them. And I'm like, yo, I want you to learn. I don't want you to like be done with learning after this or be so mad about it that you don't want to take the time to learn ever again. Jesse, I think you had your hand up.
I did. Thank you so much. Amazing. First of all. And second, I don't know, maybe it's more of questions for Katrina or some other people, but so I deal with the population that's suffering, right? And so my question is, I guess, statement first, right? So we do recovery houses. I'm with Kingdom Living Iowa. And so all of our staff, right? Myself included, the other co-founder, we're white guys, right? And then we got a handful of white liaisons. And then we did get lucky enough. We got one young guy that went through and he's African-American and he's doing awesome. And we put an advisory board together that we're kind of working on. and everybody's predominantly white. And I'm trying to find other people to mix in that group, because what I have going on, or is what we have going on as a team, is I'll have a house with 10 guys in it, right? Or 8 women. And out of the majority, 99% of them are white, or maybe a Hispanic guy and maybe an Asian guy. But my question is, with the African-American men, the younger men, we're having a harder time hanging on to them, right? We're having a harder time hanging on to them, getting them through a portion of the program where they get their feet plugged in and they're like, yes, let's do this. Not so much with the older guys. And I think most of it's probably, and most of them are coming from DOC, right? And I think with the older guys, most of them are just wore out with doing time and they're like, okay, let's stop and just focus, right? But any ideas that you or anybody else has for training for our staff, right? I think that would go a long ways. And then also, like, any ideas of how we can help integrate the men and women that we're trying to help in our program.
Yeah, so I think my best way of doing it, it's how I did it at the city, is ask them what they'd like. Ask them what you can improve upon. You know, it never hurts to ask. Obviously, like, you gotta be in a space where, you know, your feelings won't be hurt if they say, like, this program that you created, Jesse, that you did 20 years ago and it's been a success to you personally, and they're like, I hate it. You know, you got to be able to take that and not personalize it, because, you know, at the end of the day, you're asking for feedback, right? And then saying, okay, so if this was you, what would keep you here? What would help you stay? What would help you keep being engaged? Because, you know, I think there is power in figuring out what will keep folks there, right? And regarding getting folks into your committee from diverse backgrounds, I mean, how I did it really here, because I was new to Sioux City. And when I say new, I'll be honest, I was here 2 years beforehand in the HIV world, but it was during COVID. So there really wasn't social interaction per se. How I did it when I came to Sioux City is I went to local grocery stores. I went and started shopping. I went and started, you know, getting lunch there. I went and started buying drinks there, even if it was just a Coke. And I went and started doing that. And then I would introduce myself to the store owner. And then the store owner now knows me. And so now I'm saying, hey, store owner, I'm Sem from the city. And they're like, uh-oh, you're doing inspections? And then, like, no, not that. And this is what I do. And I'm looking for people for this. Is it possible, if you see someone who says, oh, I need a job, or, oh, I need this, that you'll recommend them to me, and that you'll send them and you'll give them my card? And a lot of the times, that's how I've had my success. A lot of the problems that I've addressed in this community is from these store owners who took stock and caring about their community, as well as running their business, you know? That has been really, really helpful. So I think really thinking about those local cultural hubs, because, you know, your store owners are really your leaders of your community. They really are. And restaurant owners also are. So I do that. And then I did one more thing, which was I mapped out the community. So I figured out where our cultural spots were as well for places of worship. So Do we have temples? Do we have synagogues? Do we have mosques? What do we have here? And I just figured it out. And then I met with folks and I go to their events, and that's really how I do it. Like, we have Asian Fest coming up in May, and I'm working on it with the planning committee. And so that's how I kind of connect with my folks, is I just try to be there. And the more you're there, the more it's not weird to be like, oh, you're Eli from Department of Corrections, you're Randy from Department of Corrections. Oh, I know you. You've been to 7 of my events. What do you need? And then they're willing to help.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We could all listen to you forever. I feel I'm speaking for the 99 people on the call. I will let you go. There's no questions in the chat. Just kudos and Academy Awards for what you do and how you do it. So in essence of keeping everything on task, I think we'll probably have to wrap up, sadly. But thank you from the bottom of our heart for what you do and how you do it.
No, thank you all as well. Thanks for allowing me to do this. This was a first time for me. And so I'm really appreciative. I just hope you guys keep trying to learn. If you want my phone number, my cell phone number is 712-203-7738. Please reach out if you have questions, if things come up that you're like, I don't know. Also, depending on where you're from, you have people in your community who do my job, if you didn't know that. If you're in Des Moines, you have Manisha Padal. She does my job there. If you're in Iowa City, you have Stephanie over in the Human Rights and Equity Office. And if you're in Cedar Rapids, there's a nice lady named Emily who works over there, and she does this work as well. So really use your people who are local as well, like make those connections, because they also can come in and train your staff. Like, I had the wonderful opportunity last week of coming in and training the staff in the Department of Corrections here locally. And so, these kind of things are important. And, I always say baby steps are number one. And I hope I piqued your interest. From here, it's up to you if you want to keep learning. Use your library, use tests, like there's an implicit bias test from Harvard, and it's just eye-opening to look at. It doesn't mean that you're bad. It's just good to know. Like, I know I have preferences to Ethiopian people, go figure. And so it's great. So I'm really thankful for you all. You guys are the best. Thank you guys. Great way to start a Wednesday.
Thank you so much.